Hi, I'm Warkentin from Mississippi State University, and we're here today to talk about information security management. As I said, I'm at MSU, and here at Mississippi State we have the Center for Computer Security Research, and I'm on the staff of the center. We conduct research and do consulting in security work. I'm also on the staff of the Distributed Analytics and Security Institute, and we have United States federal funding to do some security-related research projects. So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the goals of security, which are confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Now, confidentiality is the idea of keeping data secret, basically keeping sensitive information protected from data breach, for example. Whereas integrity is the idea of keeping our data accurate, intact, valid, and not allowing it to be corrupted. And availability or accessibility is ensuring that data and systems are available to people who need access to them in the form that they need access to them. So what we're going to do is start by thinking about security as something we look at either by design in advance or in response to an incident. So in roadside bomb investigations, they found that they could look to the left of the bang, or before the roadside bomb attack occurred, and try to understand what happened beforehand, or you can respond to them. So left of bang is the security design. That's one way we can look at things. And then right of bang is the incident response. Now, security risk management is a matter of looking at both threats and controls. And threats might be internal or external, and they might come from both human and non-human sources. And controls are a variety of things that we're going to touch on just briefly today, and then we'll expand on in much greater detail in a later class. So first of all, let's talk about risk analysis. When you manage any organization, you have to think about the risks to that organization. In this case, we're focused on security risks, information security risks. So the first thing we want to do is figure out what all those threats are. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the threats to the security and privacy of our information, whether they are physical threats, logical threats, internal or external. And then we'll try to think about the probability of each one occurring. So where your organization exists, you may have a very low probability of losing a data center to a volcanic eruption or an earthquake, but you might be much more likely to be hacked by a competitor or some other threat. So then you have to think about the vulnerability that you have to each one. What are your current controls and what kind of vulnerability do you have? Then you have to think about the value of the asset. If you're a healthcare organization and you hold sensitive information about your patients, if you're a Defense Department organization and you have military secrets, the value of the asset might be much higher than for other organizations. So you must calculate the risk from each threat based on the expected value of the harm and the value of the asset. And then finally, you would take appropriate action to prevent damage from each of those costs. And it's important to remember that you would not want to spend more on your controls than the expected value of that risk from loss. So you want to spend appropriately. If there's a very small likelihood of some sort of risk, you may not want to take a lot of effort to control for it. So let's talk about the threats. Now, the threats may come from internal or external sources, and the perpetrators might be human or non-human. And if they're human, they might be accidental, passive actions. They might be intentional actions that are not malicious, or they could be the worst kind, which are the intentional malicious acts. This diagram from one of my journal publications gives you a little more detail. And if you look in the upper right portion, you can see that the passive non-volitional behaviors that are not in compliance with policy might be people who are forgetful, who pick weak passwords, who accidentally don't back up their data, and so forth. Volitional would be things like leaving a PC on rather than logging off when you walk away, or not changing passwords regularly. And then the intentional malicious are the ones we really worry about, which would be an insider abuse case of fraud or sabotage or data theft. So this gives you an example of what some of those threats are that we need to carefully think about in detail, and we will talk about these and others in subsequent classes. Now, common security threats include things like natural disasters, malware, website defacement, software vulnerabilities, hackers, and so forth. We'll talk about all of these in much greater detail in a later class. Here are just 3 examples that we can use as case studies and discuss in much greater depth, and I have many more of these that we will explore. So if we just look at, for example, number 2, it says theft of critical or sensitive information by somebody inside the organization. And research shows that about half of all data breaches or data thefts come from internal sources like employees. And they could be a disloyal employee, somebody who's motivated by greed or wants to sell it and so forth. Now, once we've established what all the threats are, we need to come up with controls. And controls fall into 4 categories. First, we have those controls designed to deter, that stop an attacker from even trying to conduct an attack. So, for example, you might have strong sanctions against internal threats so that people understand they could be fired if they share a password. Then you want to prevent, which would be to stop an attempt from succeeding. So you use things like an intrusion prevention system. And if it does happen and you do have a breach or some incident, you want to know that it's happened. You want to have good technology in place to detect it. And finally, you want to be able to recover once an incident has occurred. Now, those are the categories of controls. You can also think of them as technical controls, which will generally require hardware-software configuration, or administrative controls that we'll very briefly talk about in this short segment. Now, as far as external controls, one of the things organizations frequently do is they apply encryption for data that is transmitted outside of the organization or coming in. And we use things like secure HTTP, we use virtual private networks, and other technical controls. And increasingly, many organizations are implementing a bring your own device policy for all of the employees who come to work with their portable devices like an iPhone and use that technology in conjunction with the organizational systems. We also will look at a variety of perimeter controls, and that might include physical security like locked doors and guards, Wi-Fi encryption so people in the parking lot can't detect our traffic, deliberate denial of service software, and firewalls. As far as internal controls, we have both technical and administrative, and that includes patch management, biometrics, tokens, passwords, encryption, a whole variety of things that we can explore that can be used to prevent breaches from occurring and incidences from occurring. Administrative controls really run the gamut. There are many different things that we can talk about. I want to focus for just a minute on security, education, training, and awareness campaigns. Now, many organizations have a once-a-year, simple, one-size-fits-all training program that does not give employees a chance to practice, for example, picking strong passwords or encrypting data. So we also like to think about other methods of persuading and communicating with our staff on the importance of maintaining security and privacy throughout the year. Pop-up reminders, for example. So these are very important methods. All of these administrative methods are designed to ensure that we have a higher level of compliance and that we have the right resources in place and we have good procedures that are tested and so forth. These also include things like monitoring policies and having data access policies and complying with various standards for our industry or standards from the government. This screen really just talks about a lot of the different kinds of controls that we can explore in much greater detail. So if you look at dual factor authentication in the middle there, for example, it says you have to have 2 forms of authentication. For example, a password or PIN, which is something you know, and then authentication from biometric information like a fingerprint, which is something you are. So it's harder to violate because I have to use my own finger on my phone to wake it up. You need dual factor. You need something you know and something you are, or something you have like a card or a key fob. So we have a variety of controls that we'll spend more detail talking about and try to match up the right controls with the right threats. So in conclusion, to successfully manage the information security of your organization, you want to try to ensure that the goals of confidentiality, integrity, and accessibility are achieved. You want to have risk management, which is to identify and analyze the threats. You want to know what the probabilities are for your organization for each threat, and then carefully analyze that risk and figure out the appropriate controls. And of course, once you know what the controls are, you must implement the controls, and you have to be able to monitor those and establish the right metrics so that you know that you're in compliance and that you have met your objectives for the security of your organization. This is just a small taste of what we'll be talking about in the subsequent classes. This is kind of a big picture overview of risk management.